Fair? You wouldn't know fair if it knocked on your door with a search warrant. Judge Judy's voice sliced through the courtroom like a gavel-striking marble, her words precise, measured, and utterly devastating. The statement hung in the air, a verbal guillotine suspended above the woman standing before her. A verdict delivered under the white-hot studio lights as millions watched from home. Karen Mitchell, a name that had become synonymous with entitlement in this very moment, stood frozen at the plaintiff's podium, her mouth agape, eyes wide with the kind of shock that only comes from being publicly dismantled by a legend. The courtroom audience, packed shoulder to shoulder in the gallery seats, erupted into gasps that echoed off the wood-paneled walls like thunder in a canyon. The sound was sharp, involuntary, collective, 100 voices releasing the same breath of disbelief. Cameras positioned at strategic angles zoomed in with mechanical precision, their lenses capturing every micro-expression. The tremor in Karen's jaw, the flush creeping up her neck like rising floodwater, the white-knuckled grip on her leather binder. A prop that had promised victory but now felt like a shield made of paper. The courtroom felt smaller suddenly, the overhead lights burning hotter, their fluorescent glare casting long, accusing shadows across the plaintiff's table. Court officers stationed at the exits, their uniforms crisp and their postures rigid, exchanged knowing glances, the kind shared by those who'd witnessed the scene play out 1,000 times before. Their arms crossed over their chests in synchronized satisfaction. They waited for what would come next. The bailiff, a stoic figure who'd stood beside Judge Judy through countless cases, suppressed a smirk, his lips pressing together as his eyes darted between the bench and the plaintiff. He'd seen litigants crumble before, but this was something special. In the gallery, phones stayed holstered in pockets and purses. Recording devices weren't allowed, but eyes widened to saucer proportions, mental notes being scribbled frantically for later retelling at dinner tables and office break rooms across America. The stenographer, her fingers a blur across the specialized keyboard, barely kept pace with the unfolding drama, her expression neutral but her eyes betraying the slightest hint of amusement. Even she, trained to remain detached, couldn't hide her reaction to what was unfolding. Row after row of spectators leaned forward in their seats, the wooden benches creaking softly under the shifting weight. Some clutched the armrests, knuckles pale. Others sat with hands clasped over their mouths, stifling reactions that threatened to break free. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with the electricity of a moment everyone knew would be replayed, clipped, shared, and dissected across every corner of the internet before the day's end. But how did it come to this? What led to this precise moment where a woman armed with confidence, a meticulously organized binder of evidence, and an unshakable belief in her own righteousness found herself pinned beneath the weight of her own contradictions? And Judge Judy, ever composed, ever the architect of courtroom justice, took control of the narrative without raising her voice, without breaking composure, her decades of experience weaponized into surgical precision that cut through deception like a scalpel through flesh. The stage was set in Television City Studio 58, a space transformed into America's most famous courtroom, a theater of justice where truth battled fiction 5 days a week. The judge's bench, elevated and imposing, dominated the room like a throne carved from oak and authority. Behind it hung the Great Seal of Justice, its polished bronze surface catching the studio lights and reflecting them back like a beacon, reminding all who entered that here in this space truth, not theatrics, not manipulation, not crocodile tears, would prevail. 2 tables faced the bench in stark opposition, plaintiff on the left, defendant on the right, separated by 10 feet of tension-soaked carpet that might as well have been a battlefield. The American flag stood sentinel in the corner, its colors vivid against the neutral tones of the set. The witness stand, empty for now, waited like a confession booth where secrets would be extracted and lies would wither under cross-examination. The cameras, 4 of them positioned at precise angles, blinked their red recording lights in steady rhythm, silent witnesses documenting every word, every gesture, every moment of truth or deception for an audience that stretched from Los Angeles to New York, from living rooms to break rooms, from college dorms to retirement homes. This wasn't just a courtroom. It was a stage where justice performed for millions, where accountability came with a side of entertainment, and where Judge Judith Scheindlin reigned supreme as both referee and educator. The overhead boom microphones, suspended from the ceiling like mechanical vultures, captured every sound, the rustle of papers, the clearing of throats, the sharp intake of breath when reality struck. The studio's air conditioning hummed quietly in the background, a white noise backdrop to the drama about to unfold. Production assistants lined the perimeter of the set, clipboards in hand, headsets crackling with whispered instructions from the control booth where producers monitored multiple camera feeds, adjusting shots, calling angles, orchestrating the technical symphony that brought courtroom drama into American homes. But none of the machinery mattered. None of the cameras, lights, or microphones held any real power. Because in this room, at this moment, all authority rested with the woman seated behind that elevated bench, a 5 feet 2 inches force of nature in a black robe whose reputation preceded her like a storm front. Judge Judy didn't need props. She didn't need theatrics. She needed only the truth, a sharp mind, and the willingness to speak it without apology. Anne Karen Mitchell, standing at that plaintiff's podium with her binder of carefully organized lies, was about to learn that the hard way. Before we dive into exactly how Judge Judy dismantled this case piece by devastating piece, if you love stories where justice isn't just served, it's delivered with unforgettable precision, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these moments where truth cuts through entitlement like a hot knife through butter. And stick around, because what happens next will remind you exactly why Judge Judy is a legend who stood the test of time. Now let's rewind. Let's see exactly how a woman convinced of her righteousness, armed with manufactured evidence and fueled by self-righteous indignation, walked into a courtroom expecting validation, and left it completely, utterly shattered. The case seems simple on paper, deceptively straightforward. Karen Mitchell vs. David Torres, property damage dispute, case number JJ2847. The docket summary, printed on standard court letterhead, listed damages claimed at $5,000, a figure that would have been reasonable if the facts supported it. But as Judge Judy had learned over 3 decades and 10,000 cases, simplicity on paper often concealed complexity in reality, and claimed damages rarely matched actual losses. Karen Mitchell arrived at the courthouse that morning with the confidence of someone who'd already written the ending to this story. Her heels, black patent leather, pointed toe, 3-inch height, clicked against the polished floors with martial precision as she made her way through the studio entrance. Each step was deliberate, authoritative, the gait of a woman who believed the universe owed her validation. Her blazer, tailored navy blue with gold buttons, was pressed to knife-edge perfection, not a wrinkle daring to appear. Her hair, styled in that particular shade of blonde that required bi-weekly salon appointments and considerable expense, was sprayed into submission, each strand locked in place as if movement itself would signal weakness. She carried a leather binder, burgundy, expensive, the kind sold at boutique office supply stores to people who confused organization with righteousness. Inside its clear plastic sleeves were printed emails, photographs arranged chronologically, handwritten notes in purple ink underlining key phrases, sticky tabs marking important evidence, in a rainbow of accusatory colors. This wasn't just preparation. This was theater. This was a woman who'd rehearsed her victimhood in front of a mirror, perfecting the tone of injured innocence, practicing the pause before delivering what she believed would be devastating revelations. Her makeup was camera-ready, foundation 2 shades too dark for the studio lights, contour sharp enough to cast its own shadows, lips lined in that particular shade of mauve that suggested both sophistication and suppressed fury. She'd dressed for this moment like a general dresses for battle, and she fully expected to leave this courtroom victorious, vindicated, $5,000 richer, and with the satisfaction of having put her neighbor in his place. Across from her, standing at the defendant's table with the quiet dignity of a man who'd tried every reasonable path to resolution, stood David Torres. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Where Karen radiated calculated presentation, David embodied authenticity. His flannel shirt, faded blue and gray plaid, soft from years of washing, was tucked into well-worn jeans held up by a leather belt cracked with age. His work boots, scuffed and stained with the honest dirt of manual labor, had walked job sites for 2 decades. His hands, resting calmly at his sides, were calloused and rough, the hands of a contractor who built things rather than destroyed them. David carried no leather binder, no color-coded evidence, no theatrical props. Just a single manila folder tucked under one arm, its edges bent from being carried in his truck's glove compartment. Inside, an arborist's report, a few photographs, and a handwritten timeline of events scribbled on lined notebook paper. His face, weathered by sun and age, mid-50s with deep lines around kind eyes, wore the expression of a man who'd lost sleep over this dispute not because he feared losing, but because he genuinely couldn't understand why it had come this far. He tried to settle this reasonably. God knows he tried. He'd offered to split the fence repair cost 50-50, more than fair considering the storm had been an act of nature, not negligence. He'd sent calm, respectful text messages suggesting mediation. He'd even offered to help rebuild the fence himself, waiving his usual contractor rates, just to preserve neighborhood peace. But Karen had refused every olive branch, every reasonable compromise, insisting on total capitulation. $5,000 plus an apology or she'd see him in court. Well, here they were. The bailiff, a stocky man in his 40s with a voice that could command a riot, stepped forward to the center of the courtroom. His uniform, dark blue with silver badges catching the light, represented order in a space designed to resolve chaos. He cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the ambient murmur of the gallery settling into their seats. "All rise," he announced, his voice booming with practiced authority, "for the Honorable Judge Judith Scheindlin." The gallery stood in unison, a wave of movement accompanied by the rustle of clothing, the scrape of shoes against floor, the shuffle of bodies straightening to attention. Conversations died mid-sentence. Phone screens darkened. Every eye turned toward the chamber door, stage right, where America's most famous arbiter of common sense was about to make her entrance. The door opened. Judge Judy emerged from chambers like a force of nature condensed into human form, her black robe flowing behind her with each purposeful step. The robe itself was unremarkable, standard judicial attire, black polyester, nothing fancy, but on her it became armor, a symbol of the authority she'd earned through relentless dedication to truth. Her trademark glasses, rectangular frames perched on her nose, caught the studio lights as she surveyed the courtroom with the assessing gaze of a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. She was smaller in person than television suggested, barely over 5 feet tall, but height had never been the measure of her power. Her presence filled the room like sound fills a concert hall, impossible to ignore, commanding without effort. Her hair, short and perfectly styled in that signature cut that had become iconic, framed a face that had witnessed every conceivable variety of human nonsense and emerged unimpressed by all of it. Judge Judy ascended the 3 steps to the bench with the confidence of someone who'd made this climb thousands of times, who'd sat in this seat through cases ranging from the absurd to the heartbreaking, who developed an almost supernatural ability to detect deception within the first 30 seconds of hearing someone speak. She settled into her chair, high-backed, leather, positioned to look down upon the litigants, and arranged her papers with brisk efficiency. The bailiff waited until she was seated, then commanded, "Be seated." The gallery sat as one, the sound like a collective exhale. The cameras adjusted their angles, zooming slightly to frame the 3-shot. Judge Judy at center, elevated and authoritative. Karen on the left, posture rigid with forced confidence. David on the right, shoulders relaxed but eyes alert. Judge Judy looked down at the case file before her, her reading glasses sliding slightly down her nose. She scanned the summary page, plaintiff's claim, defendant's counterclaim, brief case description, her expression revealing nothing. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for her to speak, to begin the process that would separate truth from fiction, fact from fantasy, justice from entitlement. Finally she looked up. Her eyes, sharp and penetrating behind those glasses, fixed on Karen Mitchell with the intensity of a laser finding its target. She hadn't said a word yet, but already the power dynamic was clear. This wasn't Karen's show. It never had been. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy said, her voice calm and measured, carrying the weight of anticipation that had built in the silence, "tell me why you're here." And with that simple question the trap was set. Karen straightened her shoulders, cleared her throat with theatrical precision, and launched into her opening statement with the rehearsed cadence of someone who'd practiced this monologue in front of her bathroom mirror a dozen times. Her voice emerged saccharine yet edged with rehearsed indignation, each word carefully weighted to convey maximum victimhood while maintaining a veneer of reasonableness. "Your Honor," she began, her hands gesturing toward Judge Judy in a supplicating motion that felt more manipulative than respectful, "this is a clear-cut case of negligence, pure and simple. Mr. Torres knew that his tree was dying. I'm not talking about suspicions or hunches. I'm talking about observable, visible decline that anyone with eyes could see." She paused for effect, letting the accusation hang in the air like smoke. The gallery remained silent, watching. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, neutral, assessing, revealing nothing. Her pen remained poised above her notepad, but she hadn't written anything yet. A bad sign for Karen, though she didn't seem to notice. Karen continued, her confidence building with each sentence, mistaking silence for agreement. "I sent him 3 emails, Your Honor. 3 separate warnings over the course of 5 weeks. I documented everything, dates, times, specific observations about the tree's deteriorating condition. I did everything a responsible neighbor should do." Her voice climbed slightly in pitch, edging toward righteous indignation. "And he ignored me. Every single message ignored. She held up her burgundy binder like a prosecutor presenting murder weapon evidence, waving it with enough flourish to catch the camera's attention. The plastic sleeves inside caught the light, creating little rainbows across the courtroom ceiling, an unintentionally ironic effect given the darkness of her accusations. 3 emails, Your Honor. All time-stamped, all printed, all right here in chronological order. I have documentation of everything. Judge Judy's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch, barely perceptible, but those who knew her recognized it as the first warning sign, the subtle tell that something in Karen's narrative had already triggered her finely tuned nonsense detector. Karen pressed forward, oblivious. Now my fence is destroyed, completely destroyed. 6 panels, Your Honor, custom cedar with decorative lattice topping. The impact shattered the posts at ground level, splintered the panels beyond repair, and compromised the entire structural integrity of my property line. She was building momentum now, her hand gestures becoming more animated, more sweeping. My property value has decreased because of this eyesore. I've had to look at this destruction every single day for 3 months while Mr. Torres refuses to take responsibility. She paused, placing her free hand over her heart in a gesture that probably looked sincere in her rehearsals but came across as melodramatic under the courtroom lights. And the emotional distress, Your Honor, the stress of dealing with this situation, the anxiety of having an unsafe condition on my property, the sleepless nights wondering when the rest of his trees might fall, it's been unbearable. The word unbearable was delivered with a slight crack in her voice, a calculated vulnerability meant to elicit sympathy. In the gallery, a few spectators shifted in their seats. One woman in the 3rd row rolled her eyes so hard it was audible. Judge Judy leaned back slightly in her chair, her fingers steepling in front of her face, the classic Judy pose that preceded either brilliant insight or devastating cross-examination. Ms. Mitchell, she said, her tone deceptively calm, almost conversational, before we dive into your emails and your unbearable distress, let me ask you something very simple. Karen's posture straightened further, if that was even possible. She nodded eagerly, clearly believing this was her moment to shine, to elaborate on her suffering, to seal her case with emotional testimony. Did you, Judge Judy continued, each word precisely articulated, get a second opinion from a certified arborist about this allegedly dying tree? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of implication across the courtroom. It was simple, direct, and based on Karen's sudden deer-in-headlights expression, completely unexpected. Karen blinked. What? Twice? Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Well, I didn't need to, Your Honor. I could see the tree was dying. The leaves were discolored, there was some bark peeling, and it just looked unhealthy. Anyone could see it. Her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence, replaced by defensive justification. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but her eyes, those sharp, penetrating eyes that had seen through thousands of liars, exaggerators and self-deluded plaintiffs, narrowed almost imperceptibly. Oh, she said, her voice dripping with mock enlightenment, you're an arborist now? You have professional certification in tree health assessment? A degree in forestry? Years of experience diagnosing plant diseases? Well, no, Your Honor, but Karen's hands fluttered nervously, the binder lowering slightly. But nothing. Judge Judy cut her off with surgical precision, her voice sharpening like a blade being drawn from its sheath. You're standing in my courtroom claiming negligence based on your amateur visual assessment of a tree, without any professional verification, and you think that constitutes evidence? The gallery murmured, a low rumble of recognition that the tide was already turning. Reporters in the observation section leaned forward, pens moving across notepads. The cameras zoomed in slightly on Karen's face, capturing the first micro-expressions of doubt creeping into her features, the slight tightening around her eyes, the barely perceptible twitch at the corner of her mouth. Karen tried to recover, her voice pitching higher with defensive energy. Your Honor, with all due respect, when you live next to something every day, when you see it from your kitchen window every morning, you develop an awareness. An awareness, Judge Judy repeated, her tone flat and unimpressed, is not the same as expertise. Let me guess. You also diagnose your own medical conditions from Google searches? Scattered chuckles rippled through the gallery. The bailiff's shoulders shook almost imperceptibly. Even the stenographer's lips pressed together in suppressed amusement. Karen's face flushed, not the calculated flush of manufactured emotion, but the genuine crimson of someone realizing their carefully constructed narrative was being dismantled brick by brick. That's not fair, Your Honor. I'm just trying to. Fair? Judge Judy's voice cracked like a whip, silencing the room instantly. We'll get to fair, Ms. Mitchell. Trust me, we'll get there. But first, let's see this overwhelming evidence you've been waving around like a flag. She extended her hand, fingers beckoning with impatient authority. Bailiff, retrieve the plaintiff's exhibit. The bailiff moved with practiced efficiency, crossing to Karen's table and accepting the burgundy binder she reluctantly surrendered. Her hands trembled slightly as she released it, the first physical manifestation of her eroding confidence. The binder felt heavier in the bailiff's hands than it should have, weighted not with evidence but with wishful thinking and manufactured outrage. He delivered it to the bench, placing it before Judge Judy with the reverence one might afford actual evidence. Judge Judy opened it slowly, deliberately, her reading glasses sliding down her nose as she examined the first page. Her expression remained neutral, but those who knew her could read the subtle signs, the slight tightening of her jaw, the minute head shake, the way her finger traced the text as if confirming what she already suspected. She flipped through several pages in silence, the only sound in the courtroom the soft rustle of plastic sleeves turning. Karen stood frozen at the plaintiff's podium, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning fog under harsh sunlight. David remained still at the defendant's table, his expression calm but watchful, like a man who'd brought a knife to what he'd been told was a gunfight, only to discover his opponent had brought a water pistol. Finally, Judge Judy set the binder aside with theatrical slowness, each movement deliberate and loaded with meaning. She removed her glasses, letting them hang from the chain around her neck, and fixed Karen with a look that had made seasoned lawyers reconsider their career choices. "We'll get to these," she said, her voice carrying both a promise and a threat, each word landing with the weight of impending judgment. "But first, Mr. Torres, I'd like to hear your side. And something tells me it's going to be very different from what Ms. Mitchell just sold us." The cameras caught Karen's smile tightening, her grip on the podium turning her knuckles white. In the gallery, spectators leaned forward in their seats, the wooden benches creaking softly under shifting weight. Something was building here. Everyone could feel it, a pressure in the air like static before a thunderstorm. And Judge Judy, conductor of this orchestra of truth, was just getting warmed up. David Torres stepped forward slightly, his hands resting loosely on the defendant's podium, not gripping it for support like Karen had, but simply touching it as an anchor point, a physical reminder of where he stood in this process. He cleared his throat, the sound genuine rather than theatrical, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of honesty that couldn't be manufactured or rehearsed. "Your Honor," he began, his tone respectful but not servile, steady but not aggressive, "I appreciate the opportunity to explain what actually happened here." He paused, gathering his thoughts not because he'd forgotten his lines, but because he was choosing his words carefully, the way truthful people do when they want to be precise rather than persuasive. "Mrs. Mitchell did send me those emails. That part's true. She was concerned about my tree, a 60-foot oak that's been on my property for probably 50 years, long before either of us moved into the neighborhood." He glanced briefly at Karen, not with hostility but with the weary frustration of someone who'd tried reasoning with an unreasonable person. "When I got her first email, I took it seriously. I'm a contractor, Your Honor. I understand property maintenance and I understand liability." Judge Judy nodded almost imperceptibly, her pen now moving across her notepad, the first notes she'd taken, a sign that something David was saying resonated as credible. David continued, pulling the manila folder from under his arm and opening it with one hand. "So I hired a certified arborist. Cost me $350 for the inspection and written report. The arborist, his name is Michael Chin, he's been certified for 15 years, works with the city's forestry department. He came out on March 20th, which was 5 days after Mrs. Mitchell's first email." He extracted a document from the folder, holding it up for Judge Judy to see. Even from a distance, the official letterhead was visible, professional, typed, stamped with a certification seal. Mr. Chin examined the tree thoroughly. He took core samples, checked for disease, assessed the root system, evaluated the structural integrity. His conclusion in writing was that the tree was healthy. Not dying. Not diseased. Not hazardous. Healthy. The bailiff moved forward to collect the document, delivering it to Judge Judy's bench with the same efficiency he'd shown with Karen's binder. But the contrast between the two pieces of evidence was stark. Karen's color-coded theater versus David's single-page professional assessment. Judge Judy accepted the report, her reading glasses sliding back up her nose as she scanned the document. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not quite a smile, but a subtle softening around her eyes that suggested satisfaction, the look of someone finding exactly what they expected to find. She read silently for several seconds, the courtroom holding its collective breath, then looked up at David. Certified arborist, she said, her voice matter-of-fact. 15 years experience. Clean bill of health for the tree. Dated March 20th. She set the report down, her gaze shifting to Karen, whose face had gone from flushed to pale in the span of 30 seconds. He did exactly what you asked him to do, Ms. Mitchell. He had it checked by a professional. Gasps rippled through the gallery, not the sharp, explosive kind that would come later, but softer waves of recognition, the sound of an audience beginning to realize they'd been sold one story and were now hearing the truth. Spectators exchanged glances. One man in the back row whispered to his companion behind his hand. The reporters' pens moved faster across their notepads, underlining key phrases. Certified arborist, healthy tree, did what she asked. Karen's mouth opened, her hand rising as if to interject. But Judge Judy held up a single finger, the universal gesture for not yet, and Karen froze mid-breath, her objection dying in her throat. David, emboldened by the judge's receptiveness, pressed forward. The storm hit on June 12, Your Honor. National Weather Service recorded wind gusts up to 73 miles per hour. It was classified as a severe weather event. Trees came down all over the neighborhood. My tree, the oak, it fell during the worst of it around 2:30 in the morning. Took out about 30 feet of Mrs. Mitchell's fence on its way down. His voice carried genuine regret now, the tone of someone who understood that sometimes bad things happen through no one's fault. I felt terrible about it. Even though it was an act of God, an unforeseeable weather event, I still felt responsible because it was my tree. So the next morning, soon as the storm cleared, I went over to talk to her. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly at the memory. I offered to split the fence repair cost 50-50. Told her I'd even do the labor myself at no charge if she wanted. I'm a licensed contractor, I've built hundreds of fences. Or if she preferred, we could each hire our own contractors and split the total cost down the middle. I thought that was more than fair considering the circumstances. Judge Judy's pen moved steadily across her notepad, capturing the timeline, the offer, the reasonableness of David's response. She looked up briefly. And what did Ms. Mitchell say to your offer? David's expression answered before his words did, a mixture of disbelief and resignation. She said no. Said it was 100% my responsibility because it was my tree. Demanded I pay for everything, the entire fence replacement, plus $2,000 for her emotional distress, plus an apology letter to be posted in the neighborhood newsletter. He shook his head slowly. I tried to reason with her, explained that the arborist had cleared the tree, that the storm was unprecedented, that insurance exists for exactly these situations. But she wouldn't budge. So you refused? Judge Judy asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. I refused to pay for something that wasn't my fault, yes ma'am, David said firmly. But I didn't refuse to help. I told her if she'd file with her homeowner's insurance, I'd cooperate fully with any investigation, provide the arborist report, whatever they needed. That's what insurance is for, unexpected events like this. Judge Judy nodded slowly, setting down her pen with deliberate precision. She turned her attention back to Karen's binder, opening it again to the first plastic sleeve containing the emails. Let's look at these famous emails, she said, her voice taking on that particular edge that suggested she was about to make a point that would leave a mark. She pulled out the first printed page, holding it at arm's length. Email number 1, she announced, reading aloud with the same inflection one might use to read a grocery list. Mr. Torres, I believe your tree might be unhealthy. The leaves look discolored in spots. Please have it checked. Best regards, Karen Mitchell. Dated March 15th. She set it down, her eyes lifting to Karen's face. Polite. Concerned. Neighborly. Nothing wrong with this email at all. Karen's posture straightened slightly, a flicker of hope crossing her features. Perhaps the judge was seeing her side after all. Judge Judy wasn't finished. She pulled out the second page. Email number 2, Mr. Torres, I noticed the tree looks worse this week. There's some bark peeling on the trunk. You really should do something about it soon. Karen. Dated April 2nd. Another page down. Email number 3, Mr. Torres, I'm warning you about that tree. It's clearly declining. If something happens, I'll hold you responsible. Karen Mitchell. Dated April 20th. She set all 3 pages side by side on the bench, creating a timeline visible to the cameras. Then she looked up, removing her glasses and letting them dangle from their chain, fixing Karen with a stare that could melt steel. 3 emails. All expressing concern. All making suggestions. Her voice sharpened. But not one of them mentions that you consulted a professional. Not one includes an arborist report of your own. Not one offers to split the cost of an expert evaluation. The courtroom fell silent, the kind of heavy anticipatory silence that precedes a storm. Karen's hands gripped the podium now, her earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that her narrative was unraveling faster than she could repair it. You sent warnings, Judge Judy continued, her voice rising slightly in volume and intensity, based on your amateur observations. Mr. Torres responded by hiring an expert who said the tree was fine. You didn't like that answer, so you just kept believing what you wanted to believe. She leaned forward, her eyes boring into Karen's. That's not negligence on his part, Ms. Mitchell. That's willful ignorance on yours. Gasps cracked through the studio again, sharper this time, more unified. The reporters underlined willful ignorance in their notes, drawing arrows and stars around the phrase. The bailiff's suppressed smirk had evolved into something closer to an open grin, quickly schooled back to professional neutrality. In the gallery, heads nodded in agreement, the audience already choosing sides, already seeing through the theatrical presentation to the truth underneath. Karen tried to respond, her voice climbing toward desperation. But the tree fell, Your Honor. That proves it was unhealthy. And Judge Judy, with the timing of a comedian who'd perfected her craft over decades, delivered the response that would echo through viral clips and social media shares for weeks to come. Trees fall, Ms. Mitchell. That's what they do in 73-mile-per-hour winds. Trees fall, Ms. Mitchell. That's what they do in 73-mile-per-hour winds. The words landed with the force of a closing argument, simple and irrefutable. Judge Judy's voice carried no malice, no mockery, just the plain statement of observable reality delivered with the confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years separating fact from fiction. The courtroom audience absorbed the logic like students in a master class, heads nodding in unconscious agreement, the collective aha moment rippling through the gallery in silent waves. Karen's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, denial, frustration, and finally, desperately, defiance. Her hands released their death grip on the podium only to gesture wildly in the air, grasping for argumentative leverage that wasn't there. Your Honor, with all due respect, she began, her voice climbing an octave into that particular pitch that signaled a person losing control of their narrative, this isn't just about the tree falling. It's about the principle of the matter. It's about responsibility and accountability. Judge Judy's eyebrow arched in that signature expression that had become a meme, a gif, a cultural shorthand for, "You've got to be kidding me." She leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming lightly on the bench, a rhythmic pattern that somehow conveyed both patience and its rapidly approaching expiration. Principles, she repeated, her voice flat and unimpressed. You want to talk to me about principles? Let's talk about principles. She picked up David's arborist report again, holding it between two fingers like Exhibit A in a murder trial. The principle of due diligence. Mr. Torres demonstrated it by hiring an expert. Did you? She didn't wait for an answer. The principle of good faith. Mr. Torres offered a fair compromise. Did you accept it? Still no pause. The principle of reasonableness. Mr. Torres recognized an act of God when he saw one. Did you? Each question landed like a jab, quick and precise, backing Karen into a corner with nowhere to dodge. The cameras captured every moment. Judge Judy's controlled intensity, Karen's increasingly frantic expression, David's quiet vindication as he stood watching his character be defended by someone who actually understood justice. Karen tried to pivot, her strategy shifting from righteous victim to reasonable negotiator, a transition about 10 minutes too late to be effective. Your Honor, I'm not trying to be unreasonable. I'm just trying to protect my property value and ensure that. Property value? Judge Judy cut her off with surgical precision, her voice sharpening like a scalpel finding its mark. Your property value decreased because a fence is temporarily damaged? Did a licensed appraiser tell you that? Do you have a comparative market analysis showing diminished value? Or is this another one of your amateur assessments? The gallery released a collective low whistle, the audible equivalent of, "Oh, she went there." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, searching for oxygen that wasn't coming. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush creeping up her neck now, spreading across her cheeks like wildfire, the physical manifestation of someone being publicly dismantled. Well, obviously a damaged fence impacts property aesthetics and, Karen stammered, her earlier rehearsed eloquence completely abandoned. Obviously, Judge Judy repeated, her tone dripping with sarcasm so dry it could dehydrate the Sahara. Obviously to you. Based on your extensive real estate expertise, I assume. She didn't wait for confirmation of what they both knew was fiction. Ms. Mitchell, let me explain something to you about principles since you seem confused. A principle requires consistency. You can't claim you care about responsibility while refusing to take any yourself. You can't demand accountability while providing no actual evidence. You can't talk about fairness while rejecting a fair compromise. She leaned forward now, her small frame somehow expanding to fill the entire courtroom with authority, her voice dropping to that dangerous register that preceded her most devastating observations. You know what you've demonstrated here today? Not principles. Entitlement. The belief that your feelings about a situation should override facts, that your inconvenience justifies demanding money from someone who did nothing wrong. The words hit like hammer blows, each syllable precisely placed for maximum impact. The stenographer's fingers flew across her keyboard, struggling to keep pace with the verbal dismantling. The court officers exchanged glances that communicated volumes. They'd seen hundreds of cases, thousands of litigants, but this particular flavor of entitlement being systematically destroyed never got old. Karen's defenses were crumbling now, her binder forgotten on the plaintiff's table, her notes unread, her carefully planned presentation in ruins around her feet. But desperation makes people do irrational things, and Karen, cornered, exposed, humiliated, reached for the last refuge of those losing an argument: moral outrage. Her voice rose, trembling with manufactured indignation, her hand pressing dramatically against her chest. Your Honor, this is unfair. I came here seeking justice, and instead I'm being attacked, my character is being questioned, my legitimate concerns are being dismissed. The words tumbled out in a rush, each one climbing higher in pitch than the last. I'm the victim here. I'm the one whose property was damaged. I'm the one who has to look at that destroyed fence every single day. This entire process is unfair. The courtroom went silent. Not the anticipatory silence that had preceded Judge Judy's earlier observations. This was different, heavier, more charged, like the moment before lightning strikes when the air itself seems to hold its breath. Every person in that gallery, every camera operator, every producer in the control booth watching the monitors knew that Karen had just made a catastrophic mistake. She'd said the magic word. The word that Judge Judy had been waiting for, the word that would give her the opening to deliver the line that had started this entire story, the kill shot that would define this case and echo across the internet for years to come. Judge Judy's expression didn't change dramatically. She didn't need theatrical reaction. She simply sat back in her chair, removed her glasses with deliberate slowness, let them hang from their chain, and fixed Karen Mitchell with a stare that could freeze lava. The silence stretched for 3 seconds, for 5, an eternity in courtroom time, every tick of the clock amplifying the tension until it was almost unbearable. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, measured, and absolutely lethal. Unfair, she said, the single word hanging in the air like a verdict. You're standing in MY courtroom, wasting MY time with a case thinner than your evidence binder, demanding money from a man who did everything right, and you're talking to me about unfair? She paused, letting the rhetorical question settle over the room like snow. Let me tell you what's unfair, Ms. Mitchell. Unfair is suing your neighbor for an act of God. Unfair is rejecting a reasonable compromise out of spite. Unfair is claiming damages you can't prove with evidence you don't have. Her voice rose slightly, not to a shout, but to that particular register that commanded absolute attention. And unfair is coming into my courtroom expecting me to reward your bad behavior with his money. The gallery erupted in gasps, sharp, involuntary, the sound of 100 people simultaneously recognizing they were witnessing something special. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens racing across pages. The bailiff bit the inside of his cheek to maintain professional composure. David stood motionless at the defendant's table, his expression a mixture of vindication and disbelief, like a man who'd been drowning and suddenly found solid ground. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. She had one more round in the chamber, the line that would cement this moment in courtroom history, the words that had opened this entire narrative and would now be delivered in their proper context with devastating effect. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Karen's trembling form, and with the calm precision of a surgeon making the final incision, delivered the verdict that would define this case. Fair? You wouldn't know fair if it knocked on your door with a search warrant. The courtroom exploded. Gasps became exclamations, murmurs became voices, restraint gave way to reaction. The audience didn't quite applaud, that would cross the line of courtroom decorum, but the energy was equivalent, a wave of validation and satisfaction washing over every spectator who'd watched this drama unfold. Camera operators zoomed in, capturing Karen's expression in high definition. The wide eyes, the trembling lips, the complete and utter devastation of someone who'd walked in expecting coronation and received execution. Karen stood frozen, her mouth hanging open, no sound emerging. Her hands dropped to her sides, useless appendages attached to a system that had completely shut down. The flush had drained from her face entirely, replaced by an ashen pallor that spoke of shock, humiliation, and the dawning realization that this was being recorded, broadcast, and would live forever in the eternal archive of the internet. Judge Judy sat back, her expression returning to neutral professionalism, her point made with devastating clarity. The gavel hadn't struck yet, the case wasn't technically over, but everyone in that courtroom knew the verdict had already been delivered. The silence that followed Judge Judy's devastating pronouncement stretched like taffy, thick and uncomfortable, filling every corner of the courtroom with the weight of Karen's humiliation. The gallery remained frozen in that collective breath-holding state, waiting to see if there could possibly be more, if this case could sink any deeper into the territory of catastrophic failure for the plaintiff. Karen's lips trembled, her throat working as she tried to formulate words, any words, that might salvage even a fragment of her dignity. "Your Honor," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper now, all the earlier bravado evaporated like morning dew under desert sun. This isn't how I expected." "Life rarely goes how entitled people expect it to, Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy interrupted, her tone matter-of-fact rather than cruel, the voice of a teacher delivering an uncomfortable but necessary lesson. "But we're not quite finished here." Those 6 words, "we're not quite finished here," sent a visible shudder through Karen's frame. Her eyes widened with something approaching panic. What more could there possibly be? She'd already been eviscerated, her case dismantled, her character questioned, her amateur assessments exposed as exactly that. What else could Judge Judy possibly have? Judge Judy reached beneath the bench, her hand disappearing from view for a moment before re-emerging with a stapled document. 3 pages, standard letter size, official letterhead visible even from a distance. The papers looked crisp, recently printed, the kind of evidence that gets added to a case file at the last minute when someone does their homework. Karen's breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling in visible rhythm. Her eyes fixed on those papers like a defendant watching a prosecutor pull a murder weapon from an evidence bag. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Judy began, her voice taking on that deceptively calm quality that preceded nuclear detonations, "I had my producer do a little digging before this case. You know, the kind of due diligence that responsible people do before making accusations." She adjusted her glasses, scanning the top page with theatrical slowness. "You want to guess what we found?" Karen's mouth opened but no sound emerged. Her hands gripped the podium again, knuckles white, as if the wooden structure was the only thing preventing her from collapsing entirely. "We found," Judge Judy continued, lifting the document higher so the cameras could catch the official seal at the top, "that you filed a homeowner's insurance claim for fence damage. Claim number 447B with Reliable Home Insurance. Dated June 13th, the day after the storm. The very same fence you're suing Mr. Torres over." The words landed like grenades, each one detonating in sequence. The gallery gasped, not the soft murmurs of earlier, but sharp, explosive exhalations of disbelief. This wasn't just a weak case anymore. This was potential fraud. This was a woman trying to get paid twice for the same damage. Reporters in the observation section went into overdrive, their pens flying across notepads with such speed the pages rustled audibly. One woman in the front row actually dropped her pen, the clattering sound echoing in the stunned silence that followed the revelation. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline, his professional mask slipping for just a moment to reveal genuine shock. David's jaw literally dropped, his mouth hanging open as he processed what he was hearing. Karen stuttered, her face cycling through shades of red and white like a malfunctioning traffic light. That was, yes, I filed a claim, but... Judge Judy's voice cracked like a whip, cutting through Karen's stammering with surgical precision. "But what, Ms. Mitchell? But you thought you could collect from insurance and sue your neighbor? But you thought no one would check? But you thought I was born yesterday?" She held up the document, waving it slightly for emphasis, the pages catching the studio lights and creating shadows across her face that made her look like an avenging angel of justice. "Your insurance company paid you $3,200 for fence repairs. $3,200. Dated June 28th. The check cleared your bank account on July 1st. The specificity of the details, the exact amount, the dates, the confirmation of deposit. Left no room for interpretation, no space for Karen to claim misunderstanding or confusion. This was documented, verified, irrefutable fact. So you've already been compensated, Judge Judy continued, her voice rising in volume and intensity with each word. You've already received money to fix the fence that you're now demanding Mr. Torres pay for again. You're not seeking justice, Ms. Mitchell. You're running a scam. The word scam detonated through the courtroom like dynamite in a mine shaft. Gasps became exclamations, murmurs became audible reactions. One man in the back row actually said, "Oh my God," loud enough to be picked up by the overhead microphones. The cameras zoomed in tight on Karen's face, capturing in high definition the exact moment when exposure transformed into something approaching terror. "Your Honor, no, that's not. The insurance didn't cover everything." Karen's voice climbed toward hysteria, her carefully constructed facade shattering into jagged pieces. "There were additional costs, aesthetic damages, the emotional toll. Then you should have negotiated with your insurance company." Judge Judy's voice thundered through the courtroom with the force of biblical judgment, her small frame somehow projecting the authority of giants. "You file a claim, you accept a settlement, and then you're done. You don't get to turn around and sue someone else for money you've already received." She slammed the insurance document onto the bench, the sharp crack of paper hitting wood punctuating her words like an exclamation point carved in stone. "This isn't a lawsuit, Ms. Mitchell. This is fraud. This is you trying to double dip, trying to get paid twice for the same damage, trying to exploit a man who did absolutely nothing wrong." The courtroom fell into that unique species of silence that follows a bomb blast. The shocked, ringing quiet where people's ears are still processing the explosion. Karen swayed slightly at the plaintiff's podium, her face now completely drained of color, her lips trembling, her eyes beginning to glisten with tears that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with public humiliation. In the gallery, spectators sat frozen, their phones metaphorically buzzing in their pockets with the urgent need to tell someone, anyone, about what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a court case anymore. This was a moral lesson being delivered in real time, a cautionary tale about entitlement, dishonesty, and the consequences of trying to game a system presided over by someone who'd seen every trick in the book. David stood at the defendant's table, his earlier quiet dignity transformed into visible vindication. His shoulders, which had carried the weight of false accusation for months, straightened. His expression, previously patient and resigned, now showed something approaching satisfaction. Not cruel pleasure in Karen's downfall, but the deep relief of truth finally emerging into light. Judge Judy wasn't finished. She picked up the insurance document again, her reading glasses catching the light as she scanned the details one more time. "Let's review the facts, shall we? You claimed the tree was dying, false according to a certified arborist. You claimed Mr. Torres ignored your warnings, false he hired an expert immediately. You claimed you needed $5,000 in damages, false you already received $3,200 from insurance." She set the papers down with deliberate precision, each movement calculated for maximum impact. "You've lied about the tree's condition. You've misrepresented Mr. Torres's response. And you've concealed the fact that you were already compensated. That's not 3 mistakes, Ms. Mitchell. That's a pattern." Karen's hands trembled violently now, her grip on the podium the only thing keeping her upright. A single tear escaped down her cheek, cutting a path through her foundation, leaving a flesh-colored trail in the camera-ready makeup. "Your Honor, please, this is unfair." The word unfair had barely left her lips when Judge Judy's hand shot up, palm forward, the universal gesture for stop. Her expression could have frozen fire. "You used that word before," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "And I told you what unfair actually means. Want me to remind you?" Karen shook her head mutely, tears flowing freely now, her chest heaving with suppressed sobs. "I didn't think so," Judge Judy said, her tone final and absolute. She straightened the papers on her bench, organizing them with the methodical precision of someone preparing to deliver a verdict that would leave no room for appeal, no space for argument, no possibility of reversal. The segment clock on the studio wall showed 17 minutes elapsed. In that time, a case had been presented, dismantled, and exposed. A woman had entered believing herself a victim and been revealed as something else entirely. And Judge Judy, with nothing more than facts, logic, and an unwavering commitment to truth, had demonstrated why her courtroom had become a cultural institution. The cameras held their positions, red lights blinking steadily, capturing every moment for the millions who would watch this unfold, who would share the clips, who would debate the case in comment sections and break rooms across the country. But here, in this moment, in this courtroom, only one thing mattered. The truth had been exposed and judgment was about to be delivered. Judge Judy straightened in her chair, her spine rigid with the posture of authority earned through 3 decades of separating truth from fiction, wheat from chaff, justice from manipulation. Her hands folded together on the bench before her, fingers interlaced with the same precision she applied to every aspect of her courtroom. Nothing casual, nothing accidental, every gesture calculated to communicate absolute control. The courtroom held its collective breath. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet, as if the building's mechanical systems understood that something significant was about to occur. The cameras zoomed in slightly, tightening their frames around the 3 central figures in this drama. The judge elevated and commanding, the plaintiff diminished and trembling, the defendant vindicated and still. "I've heard enough," Judge Judy announced, her voice cutting through the silence like a conductor's baton bringing an orchestra to attention. "More than enough, actually. Ms. Mitchell, you've wasted this court's time, Mr. Torres's time, and, most importantly, your own time with a case so fundamentally flawed it borders on frivolous." Karen's tears flowed more freely now, no longer calculated drops designed for sympathy but genuine streams of humiliation running unchecked down her face, carving channels through her makeup and leaving dark mascara trails in their wake. Her hands had moved from the podium to cover her mouth, as if she could physically hold back the sobs threatening to escape. Judge Judy continued, her tone shifting slightly, not to sympathy, but to that particular register she reserved for teaching moments, the voice of an educator delivering a lesson that transcended this individual case. "Judgment for the defendant," she declared, each word falling like a gavel strike. "Ms. Mitchell, you get nothing. Not a dime. Not a penny. Not an apology. Nothing." The word, nothing, echoed through the courtroom with the finality of a door slamming shut, of a book closing, of an opportunity lost forever. The gallery responded with audible reactions, quiet exclamations of yes, subtle nods of agreement, the collective satisfaction of witnessing justice delivered with precision. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. Her expression softened infinitesimally, not to kindness but to something approaching concern. The look of someone who genuinely hoped their words might penetrate, might teach, might prevent future foolishness. "And let me tell you something else, Ms. Mitchell, something I hope you'll remember long after you leave this courtroom and try to forget this entire experience." Karen's hands lowered slightly from her face, her red-rimmed eyes fixing on Judge Judy with the desperate attention of someone hoping for even a fragment of redemption. "When you come into a courtroom, any courtroom, anywhere, you'd better come with the truth. Not assumptions. Not feelings. Not what you wish were true or what you've convinced yourself must be true." Judge Judy's voice carried the weight of wisdom accumulated through 10,000 cases, countless litigants, endless variations on the same themes of human nature. "You bring facts. You bring evidence. You bring honesty. Because anything less isn't just a waste of time, it's an insult to the process." She pointed toward the exit with one authoritative finger, her arm extending fully, the gesture unmistakable in its meaning. "You tried to double-dip, collecting from insurance while suing your neighbor for the same damage. That's not seeking justice. That's seeking a payday at someone else's expense. That's using the legal system as a lottery where you thought you could game the odds." Karen's shoulders shook with silent sobs now, her entire body language communicating defeat so total it was almost painful to witness. The binder that had represented her confidence lay forgotten on the plaintiff's table, its color-coded tabs and plastic sleeves now monuments to wasted effort and misguided righteousness. "Case dismissed," Judge Judy declared, her voice rising to ensure every person in the courtroom heard not just the words but their finality. "You're done here, Ms. Mitchell. You can go." The bailiff stepped forward, his movement triggering Karen's exit like a stage cue she'd been dreading. She stood frozen for one long moment, her mind apparently struggling to process that this was really happening, that the fantasy she'd constructed, the one where she walked out victorious with a check and vindication, had been replaced by this nightmare of public exposure and humiliation. Slowly, mechanically, she bent to retrieve her binder from the table, her movements those of someone in shock, operating on autopilot because conscious thought had become too painful. Her fingers fumbled with the leather cover, nearly dropping it before clutching it to her chest like armor that had catastrophically failed to protect her. The burgundy leather that had seemed so professional, so official, so convincing just 30 minutes ago now looked like a prop in a failed performance. Her heels clicked against the courtroom floor as she turned toward the exit, but the sound was different now. Not the confident, martial clicking of her entrance, but hesitant, uneven steps, the gait of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered and reassembled into something unrecognizable. Each step seemed to require conscious effort, as if her legs had forgotten their function and needed to be reminded with every movement. The gallery parted as she approached, spectators leaning back in their seats to create a pathway, not out of respect, but out of that instinctive human desire to distance oneself from public failure, as if humiliation might be contagious. Eyes followed her retreat, some sympathetic, most merely curious, a few unmistakably satisfied. Whispers trailed in her wake like leaves stirred by passing wind. Can you believe she tried to collect twice? The insurance thing, that's just... Judge Judy destroyed her. Karen kept her eyes fixed on the courtroom doors ahead, refusing to make eye contact with anyone, her face a mask of tears and smeared makeup and devastation. The doors seemed miles away, the walk of shame stretching endlessly, every step documented by cameras that would ensure this moment lived forever in digital permanence. Finally, mercifully, she reached the exit. The bailiff pulled open the heavy wooden door, and Karen stumbled through it without a backward glance, disappearing into the hallway beyond. The door closed behind her with a heavy, resonant thud that echoed through the courtroom like a punctuation mark, a period at the end of a sentence, a conclusion to a story that had ended exactly as anyone with sense had known it would. The sound of that closing door seemed to release the tension that had been building throughout the case. The gallery collectively exhaled, shoulders relaxing, postures loosening, the courtroom returning to something resembling normal atmospheric pressure after being subjected to the intensity of Judge Judy's justice. David Torres remained at the defendant's table, his hands still resting loosely on the podium, but his expression had transformed completely. The quiet patience that had characterized his demeanor throughout the case had given way to visible relief so profound it was almost overwhelming. His eyes closed briefly, his head tilting back slightly as he released a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding since this nightmare began months ago. Judge Judy turned her attention to him, her expression softening in a way rarely seen in her courtroom, not to warmth exactly, but to something approaching approval, the look of someone recognizing competence and integrity when she saw it. Mr. Torres, she said, her voice gentler now but still carrying authority, you did everything right. Everything. David's eyes opened, meeting Judge Judy's gaze with gratitude that didn't require words. You received a complaint from a neighbor and you took it seriously, she continued, her tone taking on that teaching quality again, but this time delivering praise rather than rebuke. You hired a certified expert. You got professional verification. You offered a fair compromise when circumstances beyond anyone's control caused damage. You acted with integrity, reason, and good faith. She paused, letting the words settle, then added with particular emphasis, don't let people like Ms. Mitchell make you doubt that decency and reasonableness still matter. They do. And they're exactly what this court rewards. Thank you, Your Honor, David said, his voice thick with emotion, rough around the edges with relief and vindication and the particular satisfaction that comes from having truth finally recognized after months of being called wrong, negligent, responsible for something that was never his fault. Thank you so much. Judge Judy nodded once, a single gesture of acknowledgement and dismissal. You're free to go. And Mr. Torres? She waited until he looked at her again. Fix that fence. Put it behind you. And find better neighbors. A ripple of laughter moved through the gallery, not cruel but sympathetic, the shared recognition that sometimes the best justice is permission to move forward and forget. David gathered his simple manila folder, tucked it under his arm, and walked toward the exit with steps that had regained their earlier steady confidence. As he passed through the gallery, several spectators nodded to him in approval, one elderly gentleman even giving him a discreet thumbs up. The courtroom doors opened for him, and he stepped through into whatever came next, carrying with him the validation he deserved all along. The doors closed behind him with that same heavy thud, but this time it sounded different. Not like an ending but like a beginning. Judge Judy addressed the gallery one final time, her voice carrying that particular quality she reserved for broader lessons, for wisdom meant to extend beyond individual cases. Let this be a reminder, fairness isn't what you feel. It's what you can prove. And if you can't prove it, if all you have is assumptions, feelings, and manufactured outrage, don't waste everyone's time pretending you can. The gavel struck once, a single definitive crack that resonated through the studio like a period at the end of the final sentence, like the closing chord of a symphony, like justice condensed into sound. What began as a simple property dispute, a fallen tree, a damaged fence, a demand for $5,000, transformed into something far more profound. A masterclass in accountability, a surgical examination of entitlement, and a powerful reminder that truth, when properly defended, needs no embellishment. Judge Judy didn't just rule on a case that day. She exposed the anatomy of deception, dissecting it with precision until nothing remained but irrefutable fact and uncomfortable lessons. But beyond the drama, beyond the viral clips that would circulate through social media feeds and office water cooler conversations, beyond Karen's public humiliation and David's hard-won vindication, this encounter offers lessons that extend far beyond the wood-paneled walls of Studio 58. These are principles that apply to every conflict we face, every argument we enter, every moment when we must choose between what's convenient and what's true. In our daily lives, whether we're navigating workplace disputes, neighborhood disagreements, or family conflicts, we're constantly tempted to argue from feeling rather than fact. Karen Mitchell felt wronged. She felt her neighbor was negligent. She felt entitled to compensation. And those feelings, valid or not, became her entire case. She built a courtroom argument on the foundation of her emotions, decorated it with color-coded binders and rehearsed indignation, and expected that the intensity of her conviction would somehow substitute for actual proof. But feelings, no matter how strongly held, don't build cases. Evidence does. Facts do. Truth, verifiable and documented, does the heavy lifting that emotion cannot. David Torres understood this fundamental principle. When questioned about the tree's health, he didn't respond with feelings or assumptions. He responded with a certified arborist report, professional, documented, irrefutable. When accused of negligence, he didn't argue about his intentions. He presented a timeline of responsible action backed by receipts, reports, and witness testimony. Ask yourself, how often do we enter arguments armed with nothing more than our certainty that we're right? How many times have we demanded that others accept our perspective simply because we feel it so strongly? The next time you find yourself in a dispute, whether it's with a neighbor, a colleague, a family member, or a customer service representative, pause and ask, can I prove this? Or am I just really convinced? Truth requires homework. Justice demands preparation. And integrity means doing the work to verify what you believe before demanding that others accept it as fact. David Torres could have matched Karen's aggression with his own. When falsely accused, when dragged into court, when his character was publicly questioned, he could have responded with anger, with counter-accusations, with the kind of scorched-earth defense that turns disputes into wars. Instead, he came prepared with facts, maintained his humility throughout the process, and demonstrated a willingness to compromise even when he'd done nothing wrong. His integrity didn't just win the case, it earned respect. Judge Judy, who'd presided over thousands of litigants and developed an almost supernatural ability to detect character, recognized David's decency immediately. His quiet dignity spoke louder than Karen's theatrical outrage. His documented evidence carried more weight than her emotional appeals. His willingness to offer fair compromise revealed more about his character than any speech could have conveyed. In a world obsessed with winning arguments, with destroying opponents, with emerging victorious at any cost, David's example reminds us that sometimes the real victory is maintaining your character while truth does the heavy lifting. Integrity doesn't require volume. It doesn't need theatrics. It simply requires consistency between what you say and what you do, between what you claim and what you can prove. Karen's downfall wasn't the storm that knocked down the tree. It wasn't the fence that needed repair. It wasn't even her initial decision to pursue legal action. Her catastrophic mistake was the belief that her perspective alone, her feelings, her assessment, her conviction, warranted compensation regardless of facts, regardless of evidence, regardless of another person's documented innocence. Entitlement is a peculiar form of blindness. It convinces us that rules apply to others but not to us, that our inconvenience justifies extraordinary demands, that our feelings outweigh other people's rights. Karen believed she could file an insurance claim, collect $3,200, and then sue her neighbor for the same damage. Not because she had a legal right to do so, but because she felt she deserved it. The fence had inconvenienced her. The situation had stressed her. Therefore, someone should pay. Logic and law be damned. When we approach conflicts with humility, genuinely asking ourselves, could I be wrong? What am I missing? Is there another perspective I haven't considered? We open the door to resolution instead of escalation. We create space for compromise instead of combat. We recognize that other people's rights and dignity matter just as much as our own comfort and convenience. Judge Judy's courtroom operates on a simple philosophy that seems almost revolutionary in our current culture. Own your actions, prove your claims, or go home. No excuses. No deflections. No hiding behind feelings, assumptions, or manufactured outrage. Accountability in her world isn't optional, it's the price of admission to serious consideration. Karen tried every evasion in the book. When confronted with the arborist's report, she claimed her amateur observation should carry equal weight. When exposed for rejecting reasonable compromise, she insisted she was just protecting her property value. When caught collecting insurance while suing her neighbor, she argued the insurance didn't cover everything. Each deflection revealed the same pattern: an unwillingness to accept responsibility for her own choices, her own mistakes, her own dishonesty. In an era where accountability often feels optional, where consequences can be delayed or avoided through social media spin or selective storytelling, Judge Judy's courtroom stands as a reminder that reality still exists. Whether it's a lawsuit, a workplace conflict, a damaged relationship, or a public mistake, ducking responsibility doesn't make problems disappear. It compounds them, multiplies them, transforms manageable situations into catastrophic failures. Think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever entered a situation so convinced of your rightness that you ignored contradictory facts? Maybe you assumed someone's intentions without asking. Maybe you demanded fairness while forgetting to offer it yourself. Maybe you convinced yourself that your feelings about a situation should override observable reality. We've all been Karen in small ways, not necessarily in a courtroom, but in moments where ego eclipsed truth, where conviction replaced verification, where we demanded others accept our perspective without doing the work to prove it. The difference between wisdom and foolishness isn't whether we make these mistakes. It's whether we learn from them, whether we develop the humility to recognize them, whether we build better habits around evidence, integrity, and accountability. This story isn't just about one woman's public humiliation or one man's vindication. It's about the universal struggle between what we want to be true and what actually is. Judge Judy's courtroom is a mirror, and if we're brave enough to look honestly at our reflection, we might see opportunities to become better. Better neighbors, better colleagues, better partners, better people. So as we move forward, in our arguments, our relationships, our daily interactions with people who sometimes frustrate us and situations that don't always go our way, let's carry Judge Judy's lesson with us like a compass pointing toward truth. Come with evidence, not assumptions. Lead with integrity, not aggression. Respect the process even when it's inconvenient. Accept accountability, especially when it's uncomfortable. And if you can't prove your claim, have the humility to admit it rather than doubling down on fiction. Because fairness isn't about who speaks loudest or who feels most wronged or who can manufacture the most convincing performance of victimhood. Fairness is about what's true. And truth, as Karen Mitchell learned in the most public way possible, doesn't negotiate, doesn't compromise, and doesn't care about your feelings. It simply is. If you're loving this breakdown of how Judge Judy exposes truth with zero tolerance for nonsense, do me a favor right now. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what's the boldest thing you've ever seen someone try in court or in any argument? Have you ever witnessed someone get called out like Karen did? And if you haven't subscribed yet, seriously, what are you waiting for? This channel is where entitlement meets reality, and reality always wins. Hit that subscribe button and join this community. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth over theatrics, facts over feelings, and accountability over excuses, then you're part of this community. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the hundreds of thousands of people who come here for justice, wisdom, and the occasional reality check that we all need. Drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed someone get exposed like this? What's your personal Judge Judy moment? Either watching one or experiencing one. Let's build a conversation in the comments because these stories matter. They remind us what accountability looks like in a world that often rewards volume over validity. And here's the thing, share this video with someone who needs the reminder. We all know that person who argues from feelings instead of facts, who demands fairness while offering none, who needs to hear that truth doesn't care about your narrative. Send them this. Let Judge Judy's wisdom do the teaching. Subscribe, comment, share. Because the next time someone walks into an argument armed with nothing but audacity and a color-coded binder full of assumptions, you'll know exactly how it ends. Thanks for watching. Remember, fairness isn't what you feel, it's what you can prove. And if you can't prove it, well, Judge Judy has some very clear advice about that. See you in the next one, where justice is served and truth always wins.